Well, there we go. Hi, everybody. We've got a good number of participants who've joined us today on Friday, the 26th of July, 2024, for what is our midway point in our training series. So this is part of the EQE training preparation series that we're running for those people sitting the EQEs in 2025. So if you've joined us already, or if you're interested in what we've done already, on Monday this week, we did EQEs, out with the old, in with the new, and everything that you need to know about those transitions. We spoke to people about the structure of the new foundation exam, which will be taking place for the first time in March 2025, so the next EQEs. And we also spoke a little bit about the new M papers, M1 to M4, but of course those won't roll out until 25 for M1 and M2, and correction, 26 for M1 and M2, 27 for M3 and M4. Which means that we're still in the old system as well. So papers A, B, C, and D are all running. They will be running in 2025. So the exams that I suspect most of you on this seminar today will be sitting, they'll also be running in 2026 as well for the last time. If you want to see all the details of how the transitions work, then check out our first seminar. If you're sitting papers A and B, then check out what was seminar 2 in the series. But here we are today, and today we're dealing with paper C. So as I said before we started the recording, but I'm going to repeat it for those of you that have just joined, and for the purposes of those of you who are joining on the recording as well. I'm joined today by Hannah Auger from Venice Shipley, who's very kindly stepped in to help the profession by taking you guys through what you need in order to prepare for paper C. To set the context, this, I expect, will be the early stages of your journey. I really hope that it will set you on your path for success in paper C and all the other exams that you might be sitting with this seminar series helps with. At the end of every seminar series, we'll point you towards some suggested resources as well, and we'll be doing exactly the same for paper C at the end of this session, where you can reach out and get assistance with further ideas, tips, and in particular training. EQE training don't provide training for paper C and paper D, but there are plenty of brilliant training companies like, well, I'm not saying we're brilliant, but training companies like us who are brilliant that hopefully will be able to help you as well. We'll give you pointers towards those at the end. So now, as I see those numbers have properly stabilized, I'm going to get started. So the structure of today's session is as follows. I'm going to take you through the expectations of paper C, what you need to do to pass, what the European qualifying exams need you to do, and also what the kind of papers look like in 2020, well, what they looked like in 2024 and what they'll probably look like in 2025. And I'll explain that when I get to the slide. But that'll give you a sense of like the absolute fundamentals of this exam. But that's important because you need to know the fundamentals. You're never going to know an exam without passing them. And it will also provide you all with a good grounding of where you need to be. Then I'll stop talking and I'll hand you over to Hannah, who's actually going to do the really useful thing. She's going to give you all the top tips that you need in order to prepare for paper C and know what's expected, not just from the exam regulations, but from you in your preparations and what you need to do when you actually start putting those answers down and hopefully getting straight, on the path to achieving 50 marks and beyond to pass this exam. And as I said a moment ago, we'll wrap up by giving you some resources on next steps and where to go to find out more tips and advice and techniques for paper C. So, first of all, what do you need to know about paper C? Well, first and foremost, you need to know when it's taking place. So do check. Don't take it for granted that I'm correct, but these are the examination dates for EQE 2025 as published in February this year. And paper C will be taking place on Thursday, the 20th of March, 2025. So that's the first thing you need to know. And hopefully the other thing that you know and that you've done is you've enrolled for these exams, as you probably saw on our LinkedIn post. And if you didn't see it on our LinkedIn post, hopefully you've been informed in any event. But you need to enroll for the exams, and enrollment for the exams opened on the 8th, and it will close towards the end of September. So it's a really big window to enroll, but it closes in September, and the exams aren't until March. So please don't miss the window to enroll in these exams. You do one thing today before you knock off for the week. Double check your enrollment. If you haven't, then make sure you get that sorted next week. A fundamental point, but you're not going to pass the exams if you're not allowed to sit them. Okay. So what can you expect when you sit paper C? Well, paper C is one of the longest and most complex of the European qualifying exams, in a set of exams that are very long and complex anyway. So it is one of the harder exams. It lasts for 6 hours, and under the new electronic, sorry, I had a little bit of interference there. Under the new electronic EQE system, it is now broken into 2 parts, which we'll come on to in a moment. But the pretext of paper C has not changed. The expectation is that you will draft a notice of opposition that's been to a European patent in order to test your ability to act as a European patent attorney who is responding to the wishes of a client who wants to see patent opposed. So, as it says under paragraph 3, you're expected to put yourselves in the position of that representative and prepare a notice of opposition, which will be ready for filing when it's typed up. So, effectively, when you finish this exam, what you're left with at the end is the notice of opposition that would get the client what they need, and that would attack the patent in all the ways that it can be attacked. And not surprisingly, that notice of opposition that you prepare needs to comply with all the grounds that are relevant. So the grounds for opposition and Article 99 as well, and also the form and the content of that opposition. And also you've got to make sure you're up to speed on all of the guidelines that relate to opposition as well. You will have to make sure, in order to get all the marks, that your notice of opposition contains all of the grounds that are possible against the claims that you're presented with that could be prejudicial to the maintenance of the patent. You're not expected to just try every attack on every claim. You have to ascertain which ones are the appropriate attacks to make for the claims that you're given. And a point that will come up in a bit is that all claims need to be treated separately, and they need to take due care of all their dependencies, because you're not just going to attack claim 1 in this paper. You will not get all the marks that are available by doing that. You first need to analyze those claims deeply to make sure you've got the right claim structure, and you know all of the objects, all of the claim objects in combination that need to be attacked, and see that later in this presentation. But that, in a nutshell, is everything that you need to know in terms of what you have to do for paper C. What does it look like on the day when you do it? Well, this can be found here in the information that's provided by the EPA. Now, what you've got here is the information on the schedule for the exams that took place in 2024. Now, interestingly enough, as indicated by the arrow, these were published on the 27th of July last year. So the link is on the top of this page. Keep an eye out on that page, because I would suspect that the information on the schedule for the 2025 examination papers will be coming out very soon. It may even be out before we finish this seminar series. Anyway, what it said last year will be very similar to what it says this year. And it's that papers C and D are both split into 2 parts. So that's a difference in paper C if you've sat it previously. And we'll come on to why that's relevant for your preparations in terms of which exams you use as past papers in your preparations as well. But it takes part in 2 parts. And as you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a first and a second part. They're each 3 hours long, and they're separated by a break. So what you have to do is you have to complete the first part before the break, and then after the break, you can't go back to your answer. Although Hannah will expand on that, so if I got that in any way sort of slightly inaccurate. The interesting thing is, I did not sit the exams under the two-part format, whereas Hannah did. So she's the better person to advise you on the intricacies of what that means for the exam. What you can do in this paper, so with A and B, as we spoke about on Wednesday, you can print some things, but not everything. In this case, you're allowed to print everything except the claims of the patent that's going to be opposed. So you can print much more in this exam than you can in the other exams. So there you have it. That, in essence, is what I wanted to tell you about all the boring stuff. The important thing is to keep an eye on, what's going to be developing news about the schedules. But the particularly important thing is how you can prepare substantively for these exams. So I'm now going to hand over to Hannah, who's going to take you through all the important bits. Hannah, over to you.
Thank you. It doesn't look like I have access to controlling the presentation, but anyway, I'll let you know. That's it. This is the first bit. Yeah, so I sat the paper C in the first year that it actually became kind of a dual part exam. That was during COVID. And I think having kind of sat it at home and done it like that, I think it's a good split. I did have to do quite a lot of past papers based on the old setup, as there weren't many available then. But essentially what you can kind of expect from the first part and the second part is that in this first section, you're going to receive kind of a letter from the client, and probably the patent to be opposed, and at least some claims. It might be 2 or 3 based on kind of past experience. You'll also receive a subsection of prior art. It might only be 1 or 2 prior art documents. And then based on all the information you have available to you in that first part, you'll be expected to attack the claims that were given to you just in that first part, and you'll have 3 hours to do that. And you'll be looking at apportioning your time to kind of reading at the start, and then putting together your attacks, and then finally drafting the notice of opposition, or at least the first half of it in the first part of the exam. That will then be submitted, and you won't have access to what you submitted previously in the first part. You won't be able to edit it, and you won't be able to read it either. Then in the second part of the exam, you'll be given more information. So you might receive a second client letter. It would probably be more brief, explaining what the new information is that you're being given. And you'll typically receive more claims to oppose, and additionally more prior art. And so you'll then be expected in this part of the exam to use all of the information available to you, both from the first part and the second part, to pull together attacks for the new claims that you've received. So yeah, your priority would be attacking the new claims you received. It is also worth checking whether there are any new attacks that you can use on the claims that you previously received. I mean, I'd always sort of hedge your bets on focusing your time on the new claims, seeing as you've already attacked the other ones. But yeah, if there are any new combinations that look particularly strong, or there's maybe new added matter, sort of information that's become available to you in the client letter, then you can look to use that at this stage as well. I certainly wouldn't discard it, but yeah, a quick check of that is probably best. Next slide, please. So there are relatively few papers in the new format. I think, yeah, 4 isn't too bad. Maybe the best way to approach your revision might be to take a look at an example of the new format, and then you can always go back and look at some of the slightly older papers if you feel you need a bit more, a few more past papers to look at. But really, I think it's quite nice actually to break your revision up into the sort of 3-hour exam chunks, rather than trying to sit and do a kind of 5-hour past paper. So that's the benefit, that you can kind of break your revision up like that. There is also a mock paper from 2021, which is based on the 2017 paper. I think they worked out how to divide it somehow, as an example. Yeah, so you sort of got 5 papers to play with there. So maybe think about how you'll space them throughout your revision. Yeah, next slide, please. So an important element to paper C, and I think it's getting your head into the right mindset of how you're going to attack the claims. And really you're thinking about components of the claims that you can attack. So here you can see that there's 4 claims. Perhaps maybe you would receive 2 in the first part of the exam and 2 in the second part, or maybe you would receive all 4 in the one part of the exam. It's probably quite unlikely. But what you want to be doing is looking at breaking them down into their constituent parts. So here you see for claim 1, that's quite straightforward. It's just a product X, so you're looking for one attack there. But on claim 2 here, you'll see you've got X comprising Y or Z, or Y and Z. So that's actually 3 separate different components of the claim that you need to consider attacking there. X, you need to think of X and Y, X and Z, and then X being Y and Z. So yeah, as you can see, it's laid out here. One of the first things you want to be really doing when you're looking at reading the claims is breaking them down into those component parts, and that really makes it much easier then for you to think about how your attacks can come together. What is important also is that each element of that of a claim, such as claim 2, might have different effective dates. Might have been available in the priority document or not have been, and that will often be highlighted to you in the client letter. So I definitely recommend a sort of a highlighter when you're reading that client letter, and hopefully like some of these issues will become immediately evident to you as you read that initially. But because they might have different effective dates, they then will have different relevant prior art potentially. So once you've kind of broken down the claims like this and got their effective dates, then you can really think more carefully about which prior art is relevant. And there's like different methods for doing this, and organizing yourself and how you approach this is one of the biggest elements to this exam. I think there's somewhat of a time constraint, but really it's having a methodology that you go into the exam knowing that you're going to use, and then applying that, and then the kind of the attacks and the notice of opposition fall out from your methodology, hopefully. Sometimes you're going to find it more difficult to find the right attacks on certain claims, and I think that's normal. You won't necessarily get everyone right. But if you're well organised, that's when you're likely to pick up the most amount of marks on this paper. So yeah, one of the biggest bits of advice I give to you earlier on is thinking about how best to approach the paper. That's where some of the different revision courses can help as well, and they might give you guidance and tips on how to do that. Next slide, please. So yeah, important to consider is using all the appropriate attacks for claims. So for example, if you can see in the client letter that there's an added matter issue at some point, you can quickly wipe out one of the claims with that, because you can see, yeah, there's an added matter attack. I can write that down in my notice of opposition nice and early on, quickly, early doors, tick, and it's done. And then that gives you time to focus on looking at the prior art in more detail for some of the other claims. I'd always advise first getting your pen to paper with at least one attack on each claim. If you're not sure, maybe it's worth doing a second attack based on your second best bet, but you might not have time for that. So definitely the priority is always to get your best first guess down on paper and well drafted arguments, as that's how you're going to pick up the most amount of marks. Yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, in terms of picking up the marks, it's true that most of the points are awarded from argumentation. In fact, they nearly all are. But what you need to think about is how you're going to get to those arguments. So I think it is fair to say you will spend a fair bit of time reading and compiling your strategy. But of course, it's also really important that you give yourself enough time to then put, pen to paper, or I suspect typing up your arguments. And like I said, you can probably write down those added matter attacks quite early on, get your arguments down, but the inventive step ones are going to take longer. And it's really important that you might have the right attack, but if you don't get the arguments on paper, then you won't pick up the marks. So the division of marks is quite heavily weighted towards inventive step, which luckily you will all hopefully be familiar with. It's Similar approach to kind of paper B for inventive step, really like a methodical problem and solution approach. And you can have a template with you that you take into the exam, which will really help you with that. Yeah, I think it's not necessarily the same as your daily practice, which I'm sure you'll be gathering from many of the other sessions you're attending on in your revision. You really need to like think carefully, and that's where the mark schemes are really helpful to let you know exactly what they're looking for. And you will notice that as you go through past papers of exactly what the kind of boxes are you need to tick. And that will help you compile the best set template that you can take in with you. We'll come to that in a minute. But yeah, these are because the inventive step arguments are quite detailed, that is where the majority of the marks are available. The novelty attacks, then they're good to get because they're easier to identify and you have to spend less time on them typically. So there's a proportion of marks available for that, and yeah, there's less available for the sort of added matter and perhaps the legal issues that are raised in the letter, but again, they can actually be often quite easy marks to pick up early doors, settle the nerves, get an attack in. So I think don't discard just because they're like worth a lower percentage of marks. I think I know very few people that manage to pick up all the marks available on inventive step, but however, were easily able to pick up all the added matter marks or novelty marks. So if you get those elements right, you're kind of halfway to 50%. Like it's worth doing properly, I think. And then you give yourself a bit of leeway on the inventive step arguments. So you might not necessarily pick the right closest prior art, or sometimes those judgment calls are a bit more difficult, in my opinion. Yes. Next slide, please. Yeah, it is important to use all the information available. I do find it helpful when I reading the client letters to, have a highlighter and make sure I might identify it early on, but have a way of reminding yourself before you get to the end of the paper that you're going to come back to a specific point. Some people have like code systems they use, like particular letters or colours or however you find it useful to like highlight to yourself particular elements of the paper that you want to come back to. I think that's really useful. And when you're doing that, you can also sort of demonstrate then to the examiner exactly where that information came from. And they're just like really methodical answers where you can easily say from your argument where you were told something in the paper. For example, if you're referring to prior art, there'll be an easy way to do that based on the documents you're given, whether that's paragraph numbers or line numbers. It might be different on each document. So just make it really obvious to the examiner. If you're saying this is not novel because something is disclosed in document D1 somewhere, just really point out the obvious with them. And yeah, just as far as possible, if there's a document that you haven't used, maybe it's not something to worry about, but I would expect that you probably will use all the different prior art documents, whether that be sort of as a secondary part to your inventive step argument, from a combination of documents. I would likely suspect that you will use all of them. Don't take that for granted, but it probably is the case. Yeah, it's check your numbers with your with all these exams. It's true of paper D, where you're constantly needing to check dates, but double check your numbers when it comes to the effective dates. As I said before, break those claims down, determine the effective dates, do the same for your prior art disclosure dates, and just make sure you're really carefully getting them right, because you'll kick yourself if you come out of the exam and someone says they've used such and such document and you think it wasn't available to you or whatever. Yeah, again, it's actually a nice task to do early on in the exam, just to kind of settle your nerves to make sure you're getting all those things correct. Next slide, please. So this slide here is kind of the strategy I use personally. Different providers will use different strategies. I can run it through briefly as an example, just to kind of give you a starter point for where you might like to kind of focus your revision. But ultimately, as you go through past papers, you'll probably develop your own preferred strategy. But what I did is, yeah, firstly got the client letter and highlighted those points. That's where I mentioned having highlighters or particular naming sort of conventions for different areas of the exam. I then took to the patent to be opposed. There'll be some reading to do in that stage. It's typically not too long, but enough that you need to give yourself some time. And then from there, you can work out, what claims you've got and breaking them down into the claim components and effective dates for each of those sections of the claims, and making sure you've identified any potential different combinations of claims that you need to look at. Then I determined the easy attacks, like I mentioned earlier, anything other than novelty and inventive steps. So could be a priority matter or an added matter, probably an added matter attack, but it might also involve like needing to look at your priority issues. Then after that, I'd look at the kind of prior art dates, make sure you've got the documents correctly dated, and I'd analyse the prior art disclosures in a complete format at this stage. I think this is probably the bit that's going to take the majority of your time because you'll be flicking back and forth between the documents, and you'll want to have a system for keeping track of your attacks and having some sort of claim feature table so you can tick off against what features are present in each document. Just like you would when you sort of first start in the profession and you want to do a box ticking exercise on claim features. And then from there, I'll determine the novelty and inventive step attacks. And finally, I would draft the notice of opposition. In fact, I think what I did in the exam was to draft the kind of very basics of the notice at the start, just so I felt like I had put pen to paper early on. And I did the added matter attack available to me. Really, I drafted that as soon as I spotted it so that I could just leave it out of my mind. I knew I'd got it down on paper. And then that left me the remainder of my time to just do the remaining attacks, novelty and inventive step. And really at that stage, you're most likely going to be quite up against the clock and you're going to know what you need to get done by the end of the paper. And lastly, if there are any like client questions that have been highlighted to you, I think that comes up every so often that there are those. Then I would just sweep them up at the end. Possibly you could do it at the start if you have time, but probably by the end of the paper you'll have a better idea about how to answer them. And that's roughly how you can approach the paper, but I think different people do it in different ways. And you'll find your own strategy as you go through your revision. Just sort of thought I'd put here some of the additional resources that you will find in this paper. You'll have alongside you your sort of whatever legal textbooks you're referring to, and but you won't likely use them. You may get a legal question that requires you to dive into one of your textbooks, but really the open book element of the exam is useful here because it allows you to bring some tools in that let you determine how best to approach the paper. So personally, I had this claims matrix in and it looks a little bit complicated. Different sort of revision providers will provide you with slightly different methods and tables and claims, and you'll probably, whichever one you're taught, you'll find the easiest to use. But yeah, this is what I use, and you can see you've just got like boxes to put in effective dates and attacks and different, you can record the usability of different prior art there on the right hand side against different claims. Some people like to print these in kind of A3, so they've got loads of space available to them and use those on the day. It's really up to you how you decide to approach it. You can just do it with a plain bit of pen and paper, but sometimes it's nice to just have a system available to you that you know you can use. So that's definitely, in terms of collating your resources, at this stage, you can start to think about maybe what types of materials you'd like to take in with you, or at least being aware that these are available to you and you're certainly not expected to work from a piece of blank paper. I think that makes the exam less daunting when you allow yourself to sort of step back and think, I can have my tools with me that allow me to kind of approach it with a little bit more ease. Next slide, please. And the same here is true from having template wording. So I had a whole template of all the different possible attacks and different variations of inventive step argument and novelty argument that I could possibly desire. And I had that just to like settle me as much as anything, but also because of time. You don't have loads of time, so it's really nice if you know you need to use a sort of certain version of an inventive step argument and you've got some wording. I've just copied here to start my notice of opposition. I think there are some marks available for just stating the very the basics. So you're filing an opposition, the opponent details, and just making sure you're hitting those formality criteria for filing the opposition. And that's again something nice you can do at the start if you just want to get pen to paper, so you've got something down. And that works well. But yeah, this is just a section of the template I use, but I would expect that probably all of you will have some version of a template that you'll take into the exam. And really, a lot of the work you do in preparing, yeah, you'll do some past papers, but will be in generating the right materials that you feel comfortable with. If you know your way around the materials well, I think that's important. You know, just a revision provider might give you their template, but if you're not entirely confident in how you're going to use that and that the wording is sort of in your style and in a way you can quickly understand, then I think you will benefit from that in the exam when you're under pressure to know exactly where you need to go and exactly why your template is written as it is. I certainly wouldn't rely on what the person the year before had written in their template who you might be borrowing. It could be a good starting point perhaps for your revision, but really it's refining it to your own taste, so you're comfortable with it, that will, I think, make the difference on the day of the exam. Next slide, please. Yeah, so finally, this is just an example of another template. This is, I think the most detailed part of your template would be on the inventive step element. And this is where you can use the same for both your paper B and C. There'll certainly be some similarities, and the approaches that you'll be looking at will be really quite similar, I suspect. Yeah, I think it's good to be aware of these things early on, but don't be overwhelmed by the amount of perhaps information that you need to compile. You've got quite a long time, and many of you may not have sat or even been a part of an opposition before. I think I hadn't done very much opposition work when I was sitting my paper C, and that's normal. Some people will have done more depending on the sort of field that they're practicing in. But really, as long as you understand the kind of crux of the paper and the problem you're trying to solve, it shouldn't be an issue once you've sort of been through the revision process. Yeah, and then next slide. Is that it? Yeah.
Fantastic, Hannah. Thank you so much for that. That's unbelievably valuable set of information and sharing of your experiences of these actual exams. And with that in mind, we actually had a question come up while you were talking about the use of the template. The question is, are we allowed to write over physical paper and the AI will not flag us to the invigilator? Because during the pre-exam, the person asking this question got a message that suggested not to write with pen.
That's interesting. I mean, I never had any issues personally. I printed out the documents and was certainly annotating them in pen. I would like to look at the official guidance on that to be certain. But I certainly think that most people I know were using pen and paper, and yeah, your final answer will be written on typed into the system that's available. But I'm not sure what happened there. Perhaps it was different for the pre-exam. I'm not sure, sorry.
Yeah, I think it might be a feature of the pre-exam or an anomaly for this particular person asking the question. But when we teach papers A and B, it is unquestionable you need to do activities outside of the WiseFlow system, the online system. So you will have to be looking down at your desk, making notes, compiling your information. You know, we teach a technique of analyze. So you extract the information, then you subtract the prior art, and then you execute your answer. That's for papers A and B. But that all demands working both within the WiseFlow system and outside it. You know, you need to visualize things. Sometimes you actually literally have to draw it out as a flow diagram that would be impossible to do within the online system. So definitely proceed on the basis that you can work outside the system in order to craft your answer. But as Hannah says, you unquestionably do have to make sure you put your answer into the system at the end. But that's something that will come with practice. Okay, so thank you very much. If there are any other questions that have come up during the course of this session, oh, there's another one. Right, the question is from Stefan. Thank you, Stefan, for your question. And as I was just going to say, if anybody else has any other questions, please do share them in the Q&A. Stefan, thank you for your question. I'm not sure, Hannah, can you see the Q&A? But for the benefit of the recording, I'll read it out anyway. So it says in Rule 25.5 of the regs, the term loss of points is mentioned. Does it mean there will be negative points for missing a good opposition ground, i.e. you can fall below 0 points for this particular task? So I'll ask that question of you, Hannah, and I'm going to have a little look while we're talking at the compendium to see if I can find any examples of negative marks being awarded for loss of attacks. I don't think
Yeah, from my experience, that hasn't happened. I know of people that have received 0 marks because they've missed attacks. But I haven't heard of anyone having below 0 points for any particular part of paper C. I know that when you get your results, they do give you a breakdown, and I don't know if anyone I'm aware of, no one has had a below 0 mark for anything. I suspect that what they mean by loss of points is actually the fact that you haven't picked any up for that. But I couldn't be certain.
No, and I'm just quickly scanning now. I'm not finding a definitive answer, but I would concur with your analysis definitely that it would be you would lose the marks insofar as you haven't gained them in the first place. But if there is a set of marks, so there's 20 marks available for a particular attack, and you don't make that attack, they're not going to take 20 marks off you. So hopefully, I mean, that's stating the obvious rather, Stefan, but I hope that's answered your question and gone some way to allaying any fears that you might have. Okay, I will continue. So, as I said, I just wanted to wrap up by giving you some resources that you can go to after this session and continue your journey of preparation. So the SAPI and the EPI and EQE are all good resources and highly recommended. I personally, when I did paper C, I prepared with SAPI. My colleagues prepared with Delta Patents, and we all leaned heavily on the materials that are available both from the EPO's e-learning site and from EPI as well. In recent years, Filin have stepped into this space, and they provide training for paper C and paper D with great success and great feedback. So I encourage you to check out Zafia Pintz and the programs that she offers there with Filin too. But those are just a few sites that you can look to if you want to refer back to seminar 1 that we did. There's a more exhaustive list, and also the guide for preparation for the European qualifying exams, which is also mentioned in seminar 1, provides links to training providers as well. As I mentioned, EQE training ourselves, we're not on that list because we don't train for paper C. We just do papers A and B, and then foundation will come next year as well. Okay, so we're well on time and we're actually pretty close to wrapping up. So as I say, if you do have any questions that you want to ask, just pop them in the Q&A and I'll keep my eye on it. But I'm just going to finish up with some final thoughts for you all. So whether you're taking one exam or all of papers A, B, C, and D in this next round of exams or anything in between, well done, because you're here taking part in this seminar, which sets you apart from all the people that aren't on this seminar. And if you're watching the recording, well done as well, because that shows your intent and your dedication to preparing. So that's put you in a really good position. Please don't be overwhelmed. When you look at what the seminars are telling you that we've run in these series, there is a lot of information, but it feels a little overwhelming because we're trying to squeeze so much into such a short space of time. You know, for example, the one that I did on Wednesday for papers A and B was like 2 papers in one. So don't be overwhelmed. You're in a good place, but don't be complacent either because the exams will take place in March. So what you want to do is make a plan. So however many exams you're doing, work back from the date of the exams that we showed you at the start of this tutorial and make your plan, because excessive preparation is your secret weapon, because there's a lot to do and you need to make sure you fit it into the time available. And that's particularly important for paper D, as we'll discuss in the next seminar that we do for that with Hannah's colleague Kirsty on Monday next week. So make your plans, make your preparations as well. So these templates and these materials that we've alluded to, you know, that inventive step looks horrendous, but it's not. It's a really valuable tool. Having a multi-step thing will make sure you get the marks that are available to you. So make sure you have those. Make sure you put them into your own words, your own materials, as Hannah said, but don't just have them and open them up again when it's the exam day. You have to use them and stress test them, because it might feel like, you know, you'll go back to that inventive step slide and be like, oh, I've got everything I need here. No, that's the end of the process. You need to make sure you carry out your extraction of information so it feeds into your analysis of the paper, and so you can make the attacks for paper C and get your information ready in order to input it into the templates that you've prepared. So the whole thing is a synergistic organism of preparation that works together to make sure you're ready. In order to test your materials, you must do past papers. I mean, I'm going to say you can't pass your exams without doing past papers. Some of you might be geniuses and you'll be able to do it, but I am not one of those people. I had to do past papers. And not only do you have to do past papers, you have to immerse yourself in the compendium, and in particular, the examiner's comments. So when you have done a past paper and practiced your approaches and used your templates and materials and stress tested your techniques, don't just put it in the bin. Finish, come back to it the next day with a fresh pair of eyes, and then compare it, mark it against the marking scheme provided for you in the examiner's comments. It is so important for you to learn that technique. And if you can create study groups of people, it's what we do on our training courses. Not only do we, well, if you join us for one of our learning programs, we actually have the papers marked for you. So you get a full marking schedule back, but we also have study buddy groups where people kind of work together and exchange their papers and mark them for themselves as well. So, you know, we're all in this together. You're all in this together. Hopefully you've got a network of people. And I know there's like the EQE Telegram groups and things like that. So, you know, there's lots of support available to get out, to get amongst other people sitting these exams and share your papers and mark each other's papers, because that's a very important part of the process as well. And every time you do that, make sure you learn, not just like, oh, dang it, I made that mistake. Why did you make that mistake? Was it a piece of law that you didn't know? Add it to your template. Did you miss a certain piece of information? You know, add a note to your template to make sure you don't miss that again. Every time you do it, you get better. And the reason we've got our little logo in the bottom right-hand corner looking the way that it does is because it's a bit like preparing for an event or a race or a sport. You don't just go up and do a marathon, you train for it and you learn where you have difficulties. You need to practice your technique, but you might find that you can only run the first half well, so you need to strengthen the second half. It's all of these things. You're making yourself match fit for these exams, so when the time comes, you're ready. And if you're having a bad day, your abilities and your training will carry you through to success. With that in mind, it is a bit of a marathon. It is a tough set of exams that you're going to sit, whether you're doing one of them or all of them. So you work hard, but be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourselves. If you've got friends going through it as well, back each other up. But recognize that it'll be worth it. It's a great profession that we're part of. And it's amazing to get to qualification because, as my supervisor said, well done, now the learning starts. But it's great. And I wish you every possible success in your exams. And the investment will be worth it. Hopefully you'll get success in 2025. If you don't, it's okay, because the exams run again in 2026. And if the worst happens and you don't get them in 26, that's okay too, because as you've seen in Seminar 1, there are exemptions available for these exams that might carry over and allow you further success should you have to sit the exams under the new system. But I hope that won't be necessary. I'm sure you'll have every success when you get your results around this time next year. So, happy Friday to you all. As I say, I hope that's been useful. There are no further questions in the Q&A, so thanks for the questions that we did have. If you have any thoughts or comments or questions or anything else, then please reach out to us. I'll give you our contact details at the end. If you are sitting paper D, then the seminar for paper D is on Monday next week, as I said, with Hannah's colleague Kirsty, doing another amazing job of supporting you guys. And then if you know anybody sitting the foundation exam, another of Hannah's colleagues will be joining us in order to talk about the foundation exam as well. So I'll just leave you with one last thank you. Wish you all a very happy weekend. The training materials and the recordings from this will be available on our website, and we'll post when they're available on our LinkedIn page as well. Links to the other events that are coming up in this seminar series are there as well. But thank you all for joining, and thank you especially to Hannah for giving up her Friday evening as well and giving such an amazing insight into her experiences of this exam. I hope it's been useful for you all, and I wish you the very best of luck. And if you need anything, you know where we are. Take care. Bye, everybody.